Thank you, Dr. Starr. Hello, everyone. As she said, I'm Yohimar Sivira-Gonzalez, and I'm a proud international student from the College of Education and Human Development. And I'm a doctoral candidate in the Curriculum Instruction Program, Language Literacy, Cultures, and Communities. And today I'm talking on behalf of my research team. I belong to I'm part of a research team from the Interdisciplinary Early Childhood Research Center, and I'm going to be talking about a project we've been developing the last 2 years, yes, 2019, in early learning centers. As I say, I belong to the Early Childhood Research Center from the University of Louisville, and I work with Dr. Nortenmeyer, who is in another university right now, Ginevra Corte, Jane Andrews as our postdoctoral research associate, me and Jennifer Poller as a graduate research assistant, and we also have an undergraduate research assistant working in this project. So doing qualitative research in early learning centers. This study focuses on 5 early childhood centers located. Of course, I didn't say that, but they are located in Louisville and represents a partnership between 3 community organizations working together to improve the practice and services in high poverty locations. So in this descriptive qualitative project, we are examining teaching practice, but also the impact of those practices in the children's life and families, of course. So for this session, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of this initiative, what our research project is about, and I'm going to be diving deep in one teacher case study and my own reflections working in this project. So background and history of the initiative. So as I said before, this study focuses on 5 early learning centers, and these community organizations are working together to improve practice in these locations. So the goal of this partnership between these 3 community organizations is to provide better services to children and families by using Radio Emilia approach. So we, as a research team from the University of Louisville, are documenting and informing these community organization practices to better serve these families. A little bit about what the approach of these centers work on. So the Reggio Emilia philosophy, kind of similar to, maybe you have heard about the Montessori approach. So it's kind of similar. But the Reggio Emilia philosophy is an approach to teaching, learning, and advocacy for children. It is a way of observing that what children know, are curious about, and what challenges them. So this approach emerged in Italy after the World War II, and that in a very small Italian city in the region of Emilia Romagna. And the purpose was to reveal the life and reconstruct the society with a strong desire for change and a new and just world free from oppression, injustice, and inequality. So I feel that this approach is very appropriate to use in the areas where these community organizations are using it and that we are helping to understand. So this is important to understand why these community organizations decided to embrace this approach and give these kids a different way of learning and living. So just after the onset of the study in the fall of 2019, 3 of the 5 centers began the transition toward becoming Head Start centers. So the specific policies and practices of which they didn't fully align with Reggio approach. So this study began before all these changes, but through the qualitative data sources, the emphasis on transformations in the time of transition became a central question. So because of all these changes that these centers were going through, we started adapting what we were doing in our research project. So the purpose of this research, even before and after what happened with COVID and the transition that these centers were having into becoming Head Starts, was to work with the community partners, directors, teachers, families, and coaches to systematically examine the teaching and learning practices that emerge and persist in the time of transition while working in high poverty and diverse settings. So before COVID happened, and before these centers needed like the Head Start funding, we were researching what were the most critical components of these 5 early childhood centers approach to teaching and learning. But then when we started seeing the changes and how families were being affected by all the changes and how some centers couldn't keep up with using the same approach that the others were doing, we started researching more about what those changes were about and how we're affecting not only practices but families' life. Um, so this is an evaluation design that draws upon 3 data sources. We are using existing data from the centers. What are the parent policies? What are the policies? What are the historical documents about the creation of those projects and the partnership by the community organization, but also the centers before they belong to the Excellence Academies. So we are working on teachers' case study, family case study, coaches' case studies, and directors' case study. So far, we have worked with 20 teachers, 5 families, 5 directors, and 4 instructional coaches, but we are still in the process of collecting data. What we do every time we visit the centers, me particularly, I was assigned to 2 centers, and then when we lost one of our research team, I needed to cover another center. So we do interviews to teachers that also belong to the community that we are studying. We do environment walks. We walk in the community and the center to try to understand what we're seeing or what they are telling us that they see in those communities. And we also do observation of teaching practices. We're still working in the process of focus group, and we need more interviews with families. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I thought I needed to talk about the fact that as a Black Latina who is an international student, these realities and approach to their research and our participants is different. I work with a group of researchers who were more familiar with the realities of our participants, but also were different than me. How a white US citizen might think about the work we do is completely different than how I do it and how I see it. Since day one of this project, I knew I was assigned to 2 centers. Then we lost one of our researchers, and then I had 3 places to go to collect data. Yeah, it was a lot of work, but more than that or beyond that, I just I needed to go to these centers almost every day to be able to complete observations, interviews. Scheduling the interviews with families was one of the most challenging situations before even before COVID was very challenging. But let's talk about facing poverty in America. I come from a working class family in Venezuela, but being working class in Venezuela is completely different than being working class in the US. So since living conditions in the community, riding the bus to get to the community and the centers, and most important, talking to people, seeing myself in their stories and trying to see the world from their eyes. So why? Because oftentimes when we say I do research in such and such community, people think that is not safe. We all know that's coded language for racism. The teachers and staffs of these centers feel safe. They never give you negative comments about the community or the centers, and neither did families. So why would I, right? So I'm not trying to romanticize their experiences, but it was a way to connect with them, trying to build rapport and establish a relationship with them. Some of our interview questions ask very personal information, not only about their practices, but also their family history, because we are trying to understand how to better support the teachers so they can also connect with the families. So I needed to make sure they felt comfortable sharing such information with me. It's still a learning process, and I think the relationships that we'll be building in the community are kind of like are going to be long lasting. So kind of like to talk about why we are doing this and like what kind of like theories are we thinking that we might be using to understand what is happening in those centers is we have this idea of ideological becoming. It refers to how we develop our way of viewing the world, our system of ideas, and it's what this author calls an ideological self. So in this case, we seek to understand the mechanisms of growth and change that teachers are using during all these changes, transitions, and new ways of teaching. What ideologies and identity emerge in this data. Further, we explore how these teachers individually and as a group challenge deficit notions in their work with children from urban and rural high poverty neighborhoods, representing diverse backgrounds in terms of race, family structures, home language, among other characteristics. And my cat is going crazy. So through our findings, I'm going to be talking about three mediating influences. And those influences are relationships in building communities and also how the role of the materials in children's learning and teaching, as well as teachers as powerful, capable, and instructional leaders. In addition to these findings, during our preliminary analysis, parents' learning and engagement with the centers were also prominent. In the case study, I will show what it looks like for teacher, but prominent in our study how the practices of teachers impact children's lives, but also family and more specifically parenting skills. Parents indicated that the new ways of learning has caused behavioral and developmental changes in their kids that have pushed them to change how they do things at home. Teachers who are parents have echoed these situations as well. And we also are kind of like trying to understand how the alignment of teachers' beliefs is happening in these centers, because as teachers being part of the community and families being part of the community is so important that the home and school connections that we see all the time happening in these centers. So I wanted to present a little bit of data from our project and how this teacher presents a very unique example of a center located in a low-income community. So every time she was interviewed, you would find in her interview, we would find in her discourses related to the role of the centers in the community and how they represent an institution who's trying to change and impact children's life. Annika considers herself a natural researcher. She values all this, the community of practice and PDs that these community of organizations are putting together for them to better their practice. This center was transformed into an excellence academy, and she saw how, for example, like the MAC kitchen, the natural playground, and other changes in the environment boosted children's creativity. We cannot forget the background of or the reality of these kids in their homes. So that's important. So she will not take the lead, but let the child use what is there in the environment to learn. She learns with them as they do. Relationship with kids, parents, and other teachers is a very recurrent theme in our research. As we can see in the first quote, how Annika talks about relationship building and the different ways kids communicate that makes her learn more from them and how to work with them. That goes well with how she identifies herself as a researcher and going beyond as a facilitator and not a teacher. So however, the last two quotes is a reflection on how Annika feels regarding COVID restriction and how that have been impacting her practices. These teachers have demonstrated that they work in collaboration, in a partnership. Now everybody have to be in the rooms. So beyond the simple act of asking questions, she's just expressing that sense of isolation in her practice, which requires adaptation, of course, and new ways to imagine teaching. We cannot also forget that for 4 months, protesters marched through Louisville's streets demanding justice for Breonna Taylor and an end to racist systems that lead to police brutality. So these centers are in the west side of town, close to downtown, where all this happening, all events are happening. So she also needed to adapt their practices to those events and also learn how to talk to children about that. And that's something that when we talk to our funders, we talk about these things because it is important for teachers and these centers to get support about that too. So some of the challenges that we have perceived is how teachers need to combine these ideas of radio approach to the curriculum and use by Head Start, and how being a Head Start funding center requires different accreditation process and paperwork they were not used to. So these challenges have been addressed by a team of guiding coaches. And also some of the lessons we have learned are related to how we need to work in a partnership with these community organizations, our funders in a dialogue and reflective process that feed our research findings, but also their own intervention in those centers if we cannot do it as a research team. So we are still in year 2 of this project, soon to start collecting the focus group data, continue analyzing data and working with the community organization to provide data so they can add upon it and support and serve these teachers better. So